So welcome back, everybody. So what we're going to do today is a couple things. We're going to start by giving a research presentation overview, and this will discuss different research topics in the software engineering department. And we'll start with an overview of the most amazing researcher of all time. And he is a really, really, really amazing guy, and you may know him. And we'll talk about him in a bit. We'll have a further discussion of what research is, and we'll especially focus on different types of hypotheses, like the null and alternate hypothesis. And then we'll move on to describing a short activity that you folks will be working on next week. So throughout the semester, we're going to have a couple research presentations by research faculty in the software engineering department. And the goals of this will be for these researchers from the SE department to introduce their work. And if it will give you an idea of who you may want to collaborate with in the future. Regardless of whether or not you're doing a thesis or capstone project, you are going to need to work with a software engineering faculty advisor, and you're going to need to pair up with somebody who has similar research ideas as you have. So these talks are a way for you to get to know what the research of other SE faculty members are, and to give you an idea of who you may want to pair up with. So the software engineering department has, I would say 7 to 10 different research faculty members. This is just an overview of some of the faculty members and their research interests. So I would encourage you to take a short look at these faculty members, especially if they're in an area that you're interested in. And after their talk, maybe send them an email, stop by their office and speak with them and see if there's a project that they're pursuing that you may be able to match up your research interest in. So there are several ways that you can use to find a person's research topics or recent publications. These are 4 links that are available in the slide set and are available under the resources tab in the course webpage. And so for example, if you were to click on the Google Scholar link for somebody, this is the Google Scholar link for the most amazing person ever. And you can see all of the different publications they have, the different numbers of citations for these publications. And this should give you a pretty darn good idea of what some of the other research is, or what some of the recent publications are for different faculty members at RIT. So if you're interested maybe in Manile's work, you can see some of his publications listed in the Google Scholars page. There are also different ACM links, IEEE links, and like I said, these resources are available in the slide set, along with being available under the resources tab on the main project website. So this is just another way for you to see the different research interests that different faculty members have. For each talk that you hear, you'll want to identify some research questions, and so make notes and be ready to discuss any interesting topics or areas with the presenter afterwards, and have a set of questions for them that you can pose to them if you have any questions afterwards, if you want to stop by and chat with them or send them an email on their talks. So just give a short research overview for myself, who, like I said at the start of today's lecture, is the most amazingly awesome researcher of all time. So my research primarily focuses on mobile security. I touch a little bit on software code clones and SE education. So as far as mobile security goes, I primarily focus on how apps use permissions. Now, whether or not you have an Android phone or Apple phone, I'm sure one thing you've noticed is that different apps request different permissions. Now, sometimes these apps may request permissions appropriately, and sometimes these apps may request permissions incorrectly. One example of apps requesting permissions inappropriately is that apps could request too many or too few permissions. So for example, that wallpaper app that you download may request access to your contacts when in fact it never actually uses access to your contacts, or maybe it uses your contacts for malicious reasons. So I study why apps request too many and too few permissions. I also study how users perceive these permissions requests and how to make users feel more comfortable and more informed about the permissions their apps use. Um, working with some students, I did create a tool that detects over permissions in apps. So when apps request too many permissions, this link is available on mperm.com. So I would encourage you to check that link out. Some other projects I've been working on are the Androsec project, which resulted in an MSR data paper in 2015. And this project created a data set of open source Android apps. So what I did, working with a student, what we did is we collected about 4,000 or 5,000 open source version control repositories from F-Droid, and these are GitHub repositories in F-Droid, and we analyzed them and made them available to other researchers. So especially if you're doing a capstone project, there is absolutely nothing wrong with creating a data set or creating a tool that other researchers can use. Now, with that said, you would have to create a data set or tool that people will care about. You just can't go and create a tool or an app that researchers won't use for anything. So that'd be something you'd want to make sure to be speaking with your advisor about. There's another data set I worked with some students on, and this is the Darwin data set. And what we did here is we collected, I think, about 80,000 or so apps from Google Play, reverse engineered them, and compared various, ran different static analysis tools on them. So some of the tools we ran on them discover the apps permission over and under permissions, the permissions the apps used, different types of vulnerabilities, if the apps adhere to different coding standards, and so forth. So I would encourage you to check out both of these links and to read the correlating papers associated with these projects, because it should give you a good idea of what you should be aiming for with your capstone or thesis projects. Other projects I work on are software engineering education focused. And so one of the projects I'm most proud of is the Teaching Mobile Security project. And you can visit this project's link by going to the website teachingmobilesecurity.com. And this project is designed to educate others on how to create secure mobile apps. And so this is an educational set of modules which are designed to be used in various classrooms and in outreach events to not only educate students and developers about how to create secure apps, but I think more importantly, to show them why it's important and to get them interested in creating secure mobile apps. And so the next thing I want to talk about a little bit is some research topics in software engineering. Okay. Just make sure I'm recording here. Okay. So what I want to touch on next is a little bit about what research is and is not, and some basic principles of conducting research. And really not only software engineering, but in computing or research in general. So what is research? Research is a systematic process of collecting, analyzing, and interpreting data to increase the understanding of a phenomenon that we are interested in or concerned about. And essentially what this means is that, like software engineering, research is a process. It's a process that you follow to understand something. The good and bad of research, the bad is that because you are doing something that's new that somebody hasn't already done before, it can be pretty challenging. You don't have a set path to follow. It's not as easy as just sitting down and writing a program where you can go and always ask for help in any specific area or specific questions you have. And in some way, shape, or form, somebody's already written that's a very similar type of program. The basic definition of research is that you're doing something new and then you're doing something that nobody in the history of the world has ever done before. So there isn't a definitive path you can always follow, and you can expect to encounter unforeseen challenges. One of the difficult things of doing research is to figure out how to overcome these challenges. But I also think that's one of the more rewarding and fun parts of research, is that since you are doing something nobody's ever done before, you are blazing a path. You are blazing a path that hopefully others can follow, and that is something that is going to be rewarding not only to yourself but other researchers as well. So what research is not is merely building an app to make money. Very frequently, capstone or thesis students talk about how they want to build an app, frankly, for the sake of building an app. And you can build software to help research, but building an app such as a bus scheduling mechanism or chat application, that is definitely not during research, and that will not fulfill the objectives of a capstone or a thesis project. Research is not just gathering information. So you can gather data that can be used in other types of analysis. This can be a very good capstone project, but just gathering data for the sake of gathering data that has no end goal isn't good research to be doing. And it's just not applying what others have done. You could definitely recreate studies, and I think understanding how and why others did studies certain ways is very important and can be very useful. But doing research is just not merely recreating what somebody else has already done. And so, like I said, the bottom tab, these can be good ways to learn about research, but they are not research by itself. So there are 8 characteristics of research. So generally, when you're reading a research paper or when you're conducting research, you're going to either implicitly or definite or I guess explicitly follow these 8 steps or see these 8 characteristics of research. So all research begins with a question or a problem. If you're not answering a question or you're not solving a problem, you're not doing anything worthwhile. Whether or not you during research or heck even creating an app, you need to be solving a problem. You need to be filling a gap that exists. And so the first thing you should be thinking about when you're doing research is what problem are you solving or what questions are you going to be answering? I think very frequently students put the cart before the horse and they start trying to solve a problem before they understand what the problem actually is. So another characteristic would be a clear articulation of a goal or problem statement. So you'd say, here's the problems we have, here's the questions we're going to solve, and then you're going to come up with a 2 or 3 sentence problem statement. So an example of a problem statement could be that app developers don't understand the permissions their app should be using. So that could be an example of a short problem statement. So while problem statements are short statements, they're usually like 2 to 4 sentences usually. You give or take a sentence or two. These will be the most difficult paragraphs that you ever write. Creating a good problem statement can take weeks or months of discovery, because you do have to understand the problem. You do have to determine what types of things you can solve and should solve in your thesis or capstone. So as you folks will see over the next couple weeks, creating a problem statement is something that's a lot harder than it usually looks. You should focus on dividing principal problems into manageable or sub-problems. That's why in papers you'll frequently see several research questions that researchers are trying to solve. And so they will break problems up in research, just like you might break problems up in software engineering. It's usually guided by a specific research problem, question, or hypothesis. And so, like we'll talk about later on, you'll see different types of null and alternate hypotheses that usually guide research. There's a plan for proceeding, so you may see that defined in the methodology of a paper. And so that plan could be what the data collection analysis plan is, or just in general how the research is going to be carried out. It rests on critical assumptions, so these assumptions could be based upon previous work that has been done. It requires the collection and interpretation of data. Now, this data could be in the form of downloading 1 million apps for Google Play, or it could be survey results that you could collect. So data comes in many shapes, forms, and sizes, but research generally requires the collection and analysis of data, and it's generally very cyclical. Now, it's cyclical not only in specific projects, but in general. Very frequently, you may see papers addressing the same research questions over and over again, and there'll be very frequently improvements made upon each paper. So almost like building blocks of existing research. Another way to look at the research cycle in an individual project could be you'd start with a specific problem. You define the objectives, you define the research strategy, you design the research, you conduct a literature review, you'd gather data, you'd interpret the data, you'd look to understand the findings from this interpretation, and then that would ultimately lead back into beginning the cycle again, and would lead back into the problem. Do not at all be surprised if you go through the whole research analysis and research analysis process several times, and each time you go through with it, you either find new research questions that you might want to explore, or maybe you find improvements or problems with the research that you've done, and then you'd focus on improving them somehow. So choosing your research topic can be something very easy. Well, I would say it's generally something that's not very easy for capstone or thesis students. Some students it takes you 5 weeks, some students it takes all 15 weeks to decide upon. But choosing your research topic can be something very challenging. For the first couple weeks, especially when you're reading different papers, I would advise that you just be a sponge. Try to understand what the current work out there is, and try to find an area that you're interested in. Don't come in saying you will focus on this specific area and you will solve this specific problem, because usually that pigeonholes students into a specific area, and they end up trying to fit a round peg into a square hole, and then usually they end up struggling through the entire semester trying to make that research problem fit. So that's not always the case, but in my experience, that's usually what happens. So I'd say early on, just try to be a sponge and try to understand the various problems that are already out there. Also, you want to find a topic that is relevant to society or relevant to current research. If you come up with a topic and you come up with a plan for things that nobody cares about, it's pretty useless research. You want to come up with a topic that other researchers care about, and that's another reason why it's very important to understand the current body of work, so you can know what researchers are working on, to know what researchers have done, and to know what's going to be interesting and profound work that you can do. So some steps you can do is look at the world around you, try to understand some problems that are out there, read the literature, keep reading it, keep reading it, keep reading it. There's no such thing as reading too much. There's a lot of work out there, so you're going to want to focus on finding a specific area that you can focus on, but you're going to need to keep reading. And to find a topic that interests and motivates you. If you're interested in algorithms, you can focus on a topic related to algorithms. If you hate algorithms, don't force yourself to work on that area. Like with most things, you're going to do a much better job, and you're going to enjoy things much more if you find a topic that interests you. And the good news is that software engineering, although it's a subfield, is still a huge field. And there are even the topic of security or mobile app development, even those have so many subfields in there. You're generally going to find several areas that you're very interested in. So I would say the first couple weeks, try to find an area that you're interested in and focus on those. So in your research, scope is everything. One of the big challenges is that students try to solve too much. Their scope is generally too big. I call it the solving world hunger problem. So if you set out and you say, I'm going to make mobile apps more secure, that's a solving world hunger problem. You need to really find a sub area, one specific area you can focus on, and be an expert in that area and focus on that specific area. Now, starting off, it's quite all right to say that you're interested in mobile security or that you're interested in cryptography and web browsers. That's quite all right to start off with, but that's not how you want to define your work. You're going to want to find a specific area in each of those topics to focus on. So scope is everything. Don't try to solve world hunger. You want to define what you will be investigating in your work, and you want to define what you will not be investigating. And this is something that I would advise that you work with your advisor on once you start moving forward. But don't try to solve too much in your work. As the semester goes on, you're going to want to find a sub area and then really drill down and find a specific area in that sub area that you can focus on. Okay. So the research objectives, this is something that you're going to define fairly early on. And this is the purpose of their study. This is why you're doing the study that you're doing. So in the research objective, you're going to define and detail what the study is expected to achieve. So you might say, part of your research objective, I'm expecting to find that users prefer not to have insecure apps. And obviously that's a pretty simplistic objective, but that's just an example of an objective that you could be studying. Maybe your objective could be that developers with a high level of experience in apps generally create more secure apps. That could be something. So you can think of the objectives of the goal of your research, and if you don't have a goal for your research, and when you start conducting it, you will fail. You will be aimless. And like I said, though, it's not a problem not to have your objective totally nailed out early on. But when you really roll up your sleeves and start conducting your research, you will want to have a specific goal for the work that you're doing. Otherwise, it will fail. So there are two types of hypotheses that you'll see quite frequently, and that you'll use in your research. And these are the null and alternate hypotheses. So the null hypothesis is usually defined as this HO, and that's where there's no observable effect. And the H1 is that there is an observable effect. And so what an example of null and alternate hypothesis could be is if your research question was, does exercising help you to lose weight? So the null hypothesis would be that exercising does not help you to lose weight, while the alternate hypothesis would be that exercise leads to weight loss. Examples of defining null hypotheses would be exercising does not help you to lose weight. Other examples could be exposure to classical music has no effect on IQ score. So extroverts and introverts are equally healthy. So null hypothesis is another way of saying that there's just nothing, no change. There's no correlations in anything. For alternate hypotheses, you'll want to create testable statements. And examples of alternate hypotheses could be that exercise leads to weight loss, or exposure to classical music increases IQ score, or extroverts are healthier than introverts. So with the alternate hypothesis, you can think of that as that there is a change observed. So if you're doing a study on 1 million people to see if exercise leads to weight loss, your null hypothesis would be that exercise does not lead to weight loss. Your alternative could be the exercise leads to weight loss. And then hopefully if you conducted your study correctly, you'd see that the null hypothesis could be rejected, and you'd say that there was a correlation between exercise and leading to weight loss. So these are two types of hypothesis that you may or may not see defined in different papers. But when you conduct your work, I would really advise that you think about different types of hypotheses that you can have. Another example of a null and alternative hypothesis could be to determine if vitamin C helps to prevent colds. And so vitamin C really should help prevent colds. It's been found to prevent colds. And so for the null hypothesis, you would say that there's no difference between the vitamin C group and the placebo group as far as presenting colds. And for the alternate hypothesis, there is a significant difference between the vitamin C group and the placebo groups. Let me pause here for 1 second. Okay, so just to finish up with things today, there is an activity that I'm going to ask you folks to work on and have done by next Monday. And so for this activity, this is something you can do individually, and I'm not looking for anything super robust here, so don't think of this as like a 5-page submission. Frankly, you can look at this as far as maybe a couple paragraph submission is going to be totally suffice, and I'll talk about submission instructions in a moment. But this document should entail what the primary components of a research paper are, the primary questions papers asks, and if there's a null and alternate hypothesis and the research questions that are asked in this paper. So what you should do is go to Google Scholar, go to ACM, go to IEEE, and so again, you can find these links right on the course resources page, and find a paper that you are interested in. Oh, let me go back. Find a paper that you're interested in, and answer these primary questions about it. So talk about what the main components of this paper are. What do you notice? Are there research questions they're asking? And they may come right out and say, here's our 3 or 4 research questions, or you may have to dig in and find what the research questions are. So sometimes papers will explicitly point out their null and alternative hypotheses, but if they don't, you'll have to create those for yourself, and then I guess tie that into the research questions they're asking. So this item and this item tie together pretty closely. But really, just think of this as a general, just kind of general overview of some of the main components of a research paper. Like I said, I'm really looking for only about 3 to 5 paragraphs in this. So if this assignment takes you more than half an hour to an hour, you're doing too much for this. And when you're done with this, you can submit this into the My Courses Dropbox. So I'll scroll to the bottom here. And there'll be a Dropbox. This one's called 1-2 Components, Hypothesis, and Research Questions. And if you could submit this by 8 a.m. Monday, that would be fantastic. So that's really it for me. So thank you, everybody, and I'll talk to you next week.